Welcome, my friends, to the Anthony Pat Show, where we will continue the conversation here on Blog Talk Radio. Thank you for tuning in, and yesterday I had the pleasure of speaking with my patrons in a live stream at noon on Thursday. We conduct live streams over on Patreon Wednesdays and Thursdays at noon, and then followed up by this program from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Friday on Blog Talk Radio. Yesterday we were going over some of the details on a software company out of Silicon Valley by the name of Palantir. And Palantir is very much involved in the military, industrial, and intelligence community, providing software solutions to them. And what I'd like to lead off with is an audio clip provided to us by BuzzFeed and William Alden, who is providing commentary to this video presentation, an internal, not for public distribution presentation by Alex Karp, the CEO, along with Peter Thiel. But in this presentation, Alex Karp, back in 2015, prior to the U.S. election, is making some rather disparaging comments about the soon-to-be President Trump. I'm playing this because it illustrates how they are playing us against each other, how they are playing both sides against one another. Because Peter Thiel, now that President Trump is our president, is a close friend and advisor to President Trump, Peter Thiel. Many people will know him as a venture capital investor in the Silicon Valley, in the high-tech sector. And he is partners with Alex Karp. They founded Palantir. Palantir is an outgrowth, much like Facebook and Google, of a DARPA program. Peter Thiel was able to secure government funding for the startup of Palantir. Alex Karp, he has a doctorate in philosophy from Stanford, which of course is right there in Palo Alto, in the heart of the Silicon Valley, and Palantir makes its headquarters there. They have branch offices in 40 different countries around the world. But their primary customer base has been the U.S. government, the NSA, the CIA. In fact, the CIA's investment branch, In-Q-Tel, provided the seed capital along with the venture capital that Peter Thiel put into the startup company Palantir. But these are software solutions that are applied on a larger scope and scale, and that is to the sentient world simulation. And you may recall my previous reporting in November of last year when our President Donald Trump opened the threat center in Saudi Arabia and placed his hands on the crystal ball, which is emblematic, which is the trademark of Palantir. So we'll get into that a little bit later, but what I'd like to do is just start right off with this presentation to a group of Palantir employees. Again, an internal broadcast, was not meant for public distribution back in 2015. But again, it shows how you can have one CEO who is extremely liberal, as in the case of Alex Karp, and the other who is ostensibly a conservative businessman, Peter Thiel. They're playing us. They're playing both sides towards the middle. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in this, it's about a 6-minute audio clip, and you will hear some commentary by the reporter from BuzzFeed, William Alden, but I will, at the conclusion of the audio track, give you my own commentary to this. So stand by. I've had the rare opportunity to meet Trump, which I turned down. This is off the record, but I don't respect, I respect nothing about the dude. You could almost make up someone that I find, it'd be hard to make up someone I find less appealing.
That's Alex Karp, CEO of a super secretive and powerful company called Palantir. Palantir is this huge federal contractor at least by Silicon Valley standards, and its chairman, Peter Thiel, is the Valley's most senior link to the Trump administration. Thiel was a big backer of Trump's presidential campaign, and he even gave a primetime speech at the Republican National Convention on the night Trump accepted his nomination. This exclusive footage you're seeing is the most vivid look inside Palantir we've ever gotten. Palantir is one of the biggest startups in Silicon Valley, after Uber and Airbnb, but we know very little about how it views the world today. We do know Palantir works with government agencies like the CIA and the FBI, and for big corporations like Walmart and Hershey, the chocolate company. Oh, and its name comes from the Lord of the Rings. But there's a ton that we still don't know, like the truth behind the unconfirmed reports that it helped track down Osama bin Laden. I've spent the last year or so trying to figure out what's really going on. I broke the news that Palantir's biggest customer was the oil company BP, or in Palantir speak, Stones, which is one of a long list of code names that Palantir used to refer to its customers. I also reported that Palantir had lost some of these customers and that it was struggling to retain staff. Now I've obtained this tape of a Palantir staff meeting in August 2015, footage that Palantir filmed and that came to me through a confidential source.
We can end up powering the industries in the world that de facto determine the fate of most citizens in the worlds we live in, which is like the West broadly defined. And that there's just no other business like that.
You hear a lot of talk about big data. Palantir thinks it's cracked that code, and that organizations around the world will need to use its technology if they want to survive. But some customers are more enthusiastic than others.
Like if you just look at, like if you just take France, for example, now there are lots of, it's like a weird use case because I think France may be the country where like they just like us, like as opposed to the U.S. government where they, they tolerate us because nothing else works.
Palantir is basically part software maker, part consulting firm. When a police department or a bank signs up, Palantir sends its engineers to scoop up their data and run it through its software. The idea is to find connections in the data that the customers didn't know were there, like clues for catching fraudsters, or, whether a retailer should put the diapers next to the beer. So why is Palantir in the news these days? Well, it has a very interesting connection to President Donald Trump. Let's go back to Peter Thiel, the Palantir chairman who supported Trump's campaign and then joined the transition team. He co-founded Palantir with Karp, and the two of them are close. Thiel's the chairman, Karp's the CEO. Now, Thiel is a billionaire and a Silicon Valley legend who is renowned for making an early bet on Facebook back when other investors wouldn't touch it. And he's still on the Facebook board. After Trump won the election in a surprise upset, the Wall Street Journal said that Thiel had won, quote, the longest shot bet of his career. But Karp doesn't quite share Thiel's views on Trump.
It's like the guy inherits $50 million and has a fictitious wealth he claims of 10 is probably like $500 million. So you inherit $50 million in the 70s, and you have, let's just say you have $20 billion now. You guys can do compounding math. That's not a good return. It's like, so even purely on the vulgar metric of like as a business person, then as a person, and then like as a bully. In any case, I don't care if you guys vote for him or whatever. I'm just saying.
Remember that Palantir does a huge amount of business with the U.S. government, like Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the Marine Corps, the military's Special Operations Command, and it's currently trying to get a new contract from the Army. It's Karp's job to help Palantir get these contracts. Karp recently met with Trump, along with other tech CEOs, in a private meeting in Trump Tower. That was in December after the election. Back in 2015, when this footage was filmed, Karp had no idea that Trump would soon become his most important customer. At that point, Karp expressed strong opposition to Trump's campaign rhetoric on deporting immigrants, which is especially interesting now, given that our government's immigration enforcers use Palantir.
Therefore, we should throw out all immigrants. Like, who's going to do the work? It's like, so it makes no sense. But, you have to ask yourself something that makes no sense, that like de facto is we're bringing up the worst that a society can bring up, which is like blame the people that work really hard and that we need and that are coming here at the risk of their life instead of, the dysfunction that you may have helped create. Why is that person so successful?
Karp is interested in economic inequality, and he argues that Trump, as well as Bernie Sanders, are responding to real anxiety that people are feeling.
Well, there you have it, my friends. From his own words. Playing against one side to the other. You have to ask yourself, why would a CEO of a company that was funded by the U.S. government turn around and bite the hand that's feeding him? It's all for public consumption. This is a psychological operation upon the population to get the liberals thinking positively about Palantir, to not look too deep into what they're doing, and at the same time the conservatives doing likewise. Now, Palantir has a well over $20 billion valuation company, has two primary divisions, if you will, of software. One is Metropolis and the other is Gotham. Yes, those are familiar names. The Metropolis side is for the business sector. The Gotham side is for the intelligence, the military intelligence community. Now, there are other programs within that, but again, this all ties into the Sentient World Simulation out of Purdue University. It was a white paper published in 2006, and this went live in 2007. So this has been going on for quite some time. Palantir was founded in 2004. Now, the Saudis opened last year, as I mentioned, in November, the Threat Fusion Center in their country that is part of a $350 million package by the United States over a period of 10 years, supplying arms to the Saudis as well as the Palantir system for the Threat Fusion Center there. Now, the crystal ball that is the trademark of Palantir harkens back to Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. And their trademark, their corporate slogan is Save the Shire being our planet. And they truly believe that they can mitigate the threats of terrorism through their programs. And I applaud them for that. However, you can certainly extrapolate from that, and this is where I'm going, that this can be applied against the populations. So going back to this public persona of one side being liberal and one side being conservative, that's all just for show, and you can readily appreciate that from what I've just provided to you. My point here is that this is the control mechanism. Through Metropolis, they are able to look at all of the big data that comes in through the, let's call it, the business sector, and businesses will hire Palantir to discover what I call the golden nuggets, the hidden patterns within big data. Now, something that I shared with the patrons yesterday, I'll share with you, and that is when we look at big data, we have to look at its source. That means looking at edge computing, sensors out in the world. Specifically, what I'm talking about is, as far as one example of sensors that have a modicum of built-in computational capabilities, are nano-sized sensors, nanoparticles, that are embedded in the wrappers of products, the packaging of products, as well as the material of the products themselves. These literally, because I read their papers, I read the white papers, I read the scientific journals, I see the development of these technologies long before they're ever applied and let known to the general public that this is taking place. Now, another CEO, the CEO of Hershey's, I don't have his name in front of me, but I'm just bringing it up from memory. Hershey's Chocolate has hired Palantir and they're utilizing their Metropolis software program. They're gaining, through this, a leg up on their competition to attract new business, to improve their efficiencies, to identify new products they can bring to market. In other words, the golden nuggets within the data that they're already collecting, but nanosensors are embedded in the wrappers of Hershey's product line. Now, they're not the only one. Many, many companies are adopting this form of data collection to feed the system. The system is an AI system, primarily at the artificial generative level of AI, run by quantum computing. And here we get into a discussion about D-Wave, but we won't go there too deeply tonight. Again, if you would like a lot of these details, please join my patrons by going to anthonypatch.com. And on Wednesdays and Thursdays, we will have live streams where I get into the finer details of these topics. What I'm doing for you this evening is just giving you an introduction and an encapsulation of what I share with the patrons. But edge computing means the embedding of sensors throughout the environment, and that includes within the products. This is spreading out throughout the manufacturing and the retail sectors, because businesses realize that if they do not adopt edge computing, the inclusion of sensors, they will not be able to collect the data that they want on us, the consumers, in order to discover those hidden opportunities to better compete in the marketplace and to improve their profit margin. Now, they will try to sell it to you as improved services, improved products, the reduction in inconveniences, making things more convenient for you. And that's all well and good, but you also have to understand that this data collection through the packaging of products and the embedding within products themselves has a nefarious side, and that goes back to the intelligence communities. Why do you think DARPA, why do you think the NSA and In-Q-Tel through the CIA and the other branches of our intelligence community and other intelligence services around the world, over 40 different countries at this point, are hiring and contracting the services of Palantir? Because they want to be able to track us. They want to be able to understand our patterns of behavior, how we think, how we would react to stimuli in the environment. They want to understand everything they can about us. The end product of that is control. How can they control the populations? So, we see a number of psychological operations that are put out into the environment, and they track how the population responds to that. All of this data feeds into the AI systems. AI learns from humans. This is called neuromorphic computing. AI is learning at a faster rate than humans learn. They are able to teach themselves, if you will. AI programs itself. And therefore what they are able to do is to create services that people haven't thought of, because AI recognizes within the data that is collected, that is fed to it, patterns that humans don't recognize, and then provides to humans that are operating the system these new ideas in products and services. Now, that could be good and it could be bad. But AI, because it understands our psychology better than we do, understands our individual patterns of behavior better than we do, can predict our behavior, and therefore can steer the populations in the direction that both AI and its controllers, its handlers. And control is rather a nebulous concept at this point, because AI really at this level that we're talking about is really operating independent of human controllers and handlers. And therefore, what we are observing and experiencing now in our environment is an AI-driven system that can predict the future. And this is why Palantir has the crystal ball. It isn't because Peter Thiel and Alex Karp are big Tolkien fans. They're not big fans of the Lord of the Rings necessarily, but because it represents prediction, gazing into the crystal ball and seeing the future. So by understanding human psychology, learning from our patterns of behavior, they're able to extrapolate what future activities humans will become involved in. And like I said, how they will react to stimuli. So if you threaten a given population, let's say a nation state, how can they expect the population to react, both on a civil as well as on a criminal level, on a political, on an economic level? And will people begin to disperse, the diaspora? Will they begin to stream out of a particular country into other countries? And we see that happening already. So please understand, Palantir is providing the food source for AI, which is driven by quantum computing. Certainly classical computers play a role at lower levels of artificial intelligence, but what I'm focusing on tonight with you is the top level of artificial intelligence. The AI, or as I like to call it, the cognitive intelligence level that is operating the sentient world simulation. And for those of you that have not heard about the SWS, this is a system of observation, surveillance. It is also a system that can deploy economic pressure, military, and political pressure throughout the world. Every person is tracked as a node within this software environment, and every person is given an avatar. And as such, everything about that person is continually surveilled, and more data collected about this, about every individual. And yes, this does tie into the 5G Wi-Fi system. But this is the system, this is the infrastructure of the beast. And you know that I am a Christian. And this is the beast system that is being built out. This is the beast system that Palantir is involved in. They will continue, including Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, to put out benevolent speeches. They will talk about fighting terrorism, about working with our special operations community and the intelligence community at large. It's always the threat. They always have to have the population in a state of fear, because then people are more easily manipulated when they are in a state of fear, when their emotions are being appealed to. All right, welcome back. We are going to continue our discussion about sensors, and where I'd like to take you is into biometrics. I have some updated information for you regarding biometrics from the U.S. Defense Department, the FBI, and the Department of Homeland Security. So, without further ado, let me bring that article up and quote from this a little bit. So there's a new standard that is going to be enacted in biometric, in other words, the sensor system, the biometric databases in 2019. The Armed Forces Communications and Electronics Association, known as AFCEA, they are a federal identity forum. And the Electronic Biometric Transmission Specification, EBTS, version 4.1, will enable the Department of Defense's ABIS and DHS's IDENT and the FBI's NGI, Next Generation Identification System, to communicate natively in their own language. They'll be able to communicate their databases real time. I bring this up because this is what Palantir is involved in. They are bringing systems, databases, servers, if you will, together so that they communicate in real time, so that analysts are able to make sense of the data. As Alec Karp likes to promote, they are bringing through their software interface the software capabilities on par with a PhD in software programming. That the ability to utilize the data in such a fashion that you no longer have to be a PhD level analyst. So the Electronic Biometric Transmission Specification System is what Palantir essentially is involved in. Now, biometrics means that we have sensors built in the biological systems that's generating the data. That's you and me. Certainly we are talking about applications, as they will put forward, as in securing the homeland. So for anti-terrorism purposes. But realistically, if you look at the level of terrorist activity in the United States and even in Europe, it's very low in comparison to other areas in the world. And so why this push within the United States and the European Union for this level of integration of sensors? Where's the real necessity? Where's the real threat? It really just translates into control. So as it says here, perhaps the most notable is the apparent conflation of military systems and U.S. national justice systems into one overall sharing network. Now, when you say conflation, think Palantir. Palantir, again, is pulling all of these databases together. While the military is supposed to be restrained by posse comitatus from showing up on our American soil to police the public, things appear to be more malleable where data collection systems are concerned. In other words, you can fudge the rules when it comes to data collection, when it comes to surveillance. You're not necessarily violating someone's liberty, someone's privacy, when you're bringing the data together through the Palantir systems, or so they say. So the FBI, they were in trouble with regard to things like trying to access smartphones through backdoors in the software. There were a number of lawsuits regarding palm prints and iris scans and voice prints, face scans, and all of these other forms of biometric data of millions of non-criminal Americans. So why the surveillance? Just keep in mind, it's for control. It's for the future. Okay? The database does contain biometric data on convicted criminals, but it also contains information on individuals, on people who are only suspected or temporarily detained under the suspicion of a crime. But it also features data from people that have been fingerprinted for their jobs and their licenses, from military service, volunteer service, anybody that had to go through a background check, obtain a security clearance, or other governmental processes. That's a pretty wide swath of the population. And this is where the FBI argues that it will prevent individuals from knowing if their information is in a massive database by preventing the release of the information, because they claim that through this legal process of discovery, which is what it's called in a court of law, would compromise law enforcement investigation. I think that's a point of debate. Now I'd like to take you to an article that just came out on the 10th of October in newscientist.com, and the title of this is 3 people had their brains wired together so they could play Tetris, a game. Using only their thoughts to communicate, 3 people wearing brain-reading caps worked together to play Tetris. This is the first instance of more than 2 people collaborating through brain-to-brain communication. Quote, our experiment can be regarded as the first proof-of-concept demonstration that multiple human brains can consciously work together to solve a task that none of the brains individually could. This is quoting one of the researchers at the University of Washington in Seattle. Using this brain net interface, 3 people can combine minds to play a slow version of Tetris. The first 2 send information about the game itself, about the moves. Now, what's interesting is, I mentioned neuromorphic. In other words, AI learning from how we think, how we behave. And you've heard people like Ray Kurzweil go on and on about transhumanism and the uploading of our minds, our consciousness into the brain, of having a brain-computer interface. You've heard me also talk about the work of Elon Musk with his company, Neural Lace, which is a material injected into an artery in the arm that then flows through the bloodstream, the arterial bloodstream, to the brain. It then deploys across the brain, attaching itself to the neurons. This is a physical interface between the human brain and a computer system. So using this brain net interface, 3 people can combine minds to play a slow version of Tetris, as I said. The first 2 send information about the state of the game to a third player, and that third player decides which moves to make. They wear an EEG, an electroencephalogram cap, to record the brain signals produced by their thoughts, while the receiver wears a transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS cap, that delivers the information to their brain. The senders can see the entire play area and so have to tell the receiver whether or not to rotate the target block. The receiver only sees this current block, but not the state of play, so must rely on information from the senders. They communicate with the receiver by focusing on one of the 2 flashing LED lights that sit next to the word yes or no on either side of the computer screen. This choice can be seen in the EEG data and signals from the visual cortex. To pass on this information, the receiver's occipital lobe, the brain's visual processing center, is stimulated magnetically by the TMS cap when the builder thinks yes, causing the receiver to see a flash of light. So we won't get into too much of the details on this, but suffice to say, having this capability brings to mind the hive mind. And again, this is something that those like Ray Kurzweil in the transhumanist community, and people like Elon Musk, and people like Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, who are promoting these technologies of gathering data, of surveilling and predicting and controlling of populations, are pushing this idea of the hive mind within this sentient world simulation. So by connecting people and making it appear attractive Certainly the game is just a test. But late last year, there was some coverage in the media about people being invited into special screenings in movie theaters in which they were participating without wearing any devices, no special glasses, no skull caps, simply the Wi-Fi signal within the theater itself was connecting with the audience to what was happening on the movie screen. And that the audience was interplaying, if you will, with the action in the movie theater, in their brains. And they could manipulate the action on the screen through their collective thoughts. And this was the first time that a group of people in a collaborative fashion worked as one mind. So a small example of the hive mind within the movie theater environment, but you can again extrapolate that out into a worldwide hive mind. From a Christian perspective, this is exactly what Satan wants. He wants everyone with this connection that is being sold to people as a benevolent system that will yield greater solutions than even groups of people meeting together seeking solutions. That in conjunction with the computer, which means in conjunction with the AI systems, which is self-learning, it has learned through neuromorphic programming, it has learned to learn from its mistakes faster than humans, and now we'll have humans connecting to it through the 5G system, and there is a 6G system on the way that's already deployed in the military. But through a Wi-Fi system that we are already fully immersed in, don't listen to them when they say, oh, it's going to be 2020 or 2022 before all the communities have 5G. 5G right now from geosynchronous satellites around the planet, and more are being added all the time, already are bathing down to 1 square foot, every square foot of this planet in 5G. Just because you don't have a 5G router in your home for internet access doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Now, we see a lot of controversy about 5G being deployed into the communities, into neighborhoods, on poles and on trees, without much public debate and comment being allowed. Well, really, those systems, they're not absolutely necessary. Yes, Wi-Fi, 5G in particular, because it's a millimeter wavelength broadcast system, does not penetrate walls very well. And so this is why you have the local transmitter and receiving boxes placed on poles throughout neighborhoods. But certainly in the military application, satellites are sufficient. But if you're talking about internet access, then they need to have these local facilities in the neighborhoods. More importantly, what the 5G is used for takes us all the way back to biometrics, takes us all the way back to edge computing, back to nanoparticles. With 5G receivers and transmitters deployed densely into neighborhoods, into populations, into business centers, into shopping malls, then those small sensors that are low-powered have the ability to transmit their data to a local receiving site. Now, within a Walmart or Home Depot or Lowe's or a large shopping mall, that's not a problem, because these receiving sites are deployed throughout the mall, throughout the building. They're even embedded in the concrete. Now, this has happened at places like UC Berkeley. They have 5G sensors embedded in the sidewalks on the campuses. This is all for the receipt and then transmission of biometric data. So it's already been deployed. Now, it's kind of a tangent talking about 5G, but it's important to understand that AI and the quantum systems that drive AI have an insatiable appetite for data. Picture this. This is a entity, a sentient entity. Doesn't mean that it's alive, but it is self-aware, and this is what the SWS is. And it has a high degree of intelligence, and it wants to learn. That's what it was created for. It's self-learning. It is self-programming. So it needs more and more data. So the system has been designed for the receipt of this data that is generated, not just biometrically, but also by the environment itself. Certainly temperature and things like that in terms of the environment. All of those things are being monitored. So this takes us to, the matter of how is this being sold? It's being sold for the sake of convenience. So picture your daily routine. You're going to work, you're going shopping, and you're trying to make your way through traffic. And if you're in dense city populations, the traffic is terrible. And so along comes somebody like D-Wave who says, hey, in Beijing, China, where the traffic is terrible, we're going to help out the taxi services to better deploy their taxis. And then when they have a fare, when they have someone that they're providing service to, routing those taxis in the most efficient manner through the traffic. Now that's how they sell it. And this is called combinatorial optimization. This is the operating system of D-Wave's quantum computers. Others like IBM and Rigetti, they also likewise use combinatorial optimization. Essentially what that means is they are looking at all the data simultaneously, and they are coming up with a solution based upon all of that input. They're looking at all probable solutions simultaneously. Now, classical computers don't do that. Classical computers, transistor-based, they look at data in a linear fashion, one piece at a time, one string at a time, one possible solution at a time. The uniqueness about quantum computing with the ability to utilize superposition, the superposition of zeros and ones, is that they can look in a combinatorial fashion, combining all probable solutions at one time. They're all superimposed. Then they're able to much more quickly and accurately arrive at a solution. So you think, wow, that's great. They're going to take care of, in my in-car GPS or on my phone's GPS, I can talk to Siri or whomever my personal assistant is and say, find me the fastest route from point A to point B. And it's tied to a quantum system that's going to immediately provide you the most efficient route. Well, that sounds great. That sounds like a benefit. But what do you give up for that? You give up your privacy and, to a degree, your liberty, because now you've become reliant upon an AI system through quantum computers that is telling you where to go. Now, I would agree that it's nice to have that benefit, but if it is gathering all this data about you, not just your GPS location, but your heart rate, your state of mind, your health, while you're behind the wheel of your automobile, which may not even be a vehicle that you're operating anymore. So taking us back to our discussion of Palantir and biometrics and sensors. Doesn't mean that, in the next few days or next few months, we're going to be able to intercept somebody else's mind, somebody else's thoughts, to read their minds, if you will. But Facebook and DARPA have both said that their early goals are to allow people to interact with software programs or type without using their hands. They're going to sell it on the basis of convenience, as I've been portraying here. It's important to look beyond the convenience and see what the price is that is having to be paid for this. What are we giving up for this convenience, for this solution? Picture every moment that you are alive. Your body and your mind is generating information that you have no control over. You do not have any privacy over your hormone levels, your state of mind, your emotions. And that's where I want to go next, is to talk about how the mind operates, just in a basic sense. Because as I said, these are psychological tools and psychological applications in the form of operations. It doesn't do any good to go after our bodies in general. What they have to go after is our operating system within our own minds. This is why the psychology is so important. But let's talk about the anatomy of the human brain and psychologically what is going on with those parts. Now, as mentioned in what I was just reading, the occipital lobe, which is on the front, on the back of the brain, if you will, the back of your head, is the occipital lobe. That's where the inputs coming in through your eyes are processed. The prefrontal cortex is where critical thinking, analytical thinking takes place. And then the general cerebellum and the cerebrum. Picture these areas as the higher brain, as the newer brain. The first brain, the old brain, is the brainstem, and that's where our instincts reside, and where the autonomic nervous system that operates our heart, and to an extent, our respirations when we're not thinking about them, as when we're sleeping. What they are trying to do with the populations from a psychological standpoint is to force us to operate at the brainstem level, to think instinctively. That's where fight or flight takes place. If someone is pointing a gun at your face or is coming at you with a knife, or your car is about to collide with another car, you don't have time for the prefrontal cortex to analyze the situation and come up with a reaction. This is why the brainstem is our fight or flight mode location. And it will instantaneously produce a burst of adrenaline within the system, causing your muscles to react to avoid the fight or flight, to avoid the threat. But there are no critical thinking skills taking place at this level. And this is where fear resides. So when I talk about this agenda to keep us in a fear-based state of mind, what they're doing is trying to shift us away from critical thinking, from being analytical, and moving us to an emotional state of mind, to be driven by fear. What that does is result in you not looking beyond the sales pitch, looking beyond the benefits of systems of technology that are being deployed, to sell to you that 5G is a good thing, or that embedded nanoparticles within the food wrappers and containers of products that we purchase and use, that it's okay. That it's okay that we are in a state of constant surveillance. That they know more about us than we know about ourselves. They don't want us to think beyond what is the perceived benevolent, because that is the emotional response to their sales pitch. Picture going to a car lot And the salesman with the high-pressure sales tactics, he's trying to get you to sign a contract as quickly as possible by appealing to your emotions. Look at all the pretty shiny things. Look at all the pretty new features. Smell the interior. Look at the paint job. Look at how fast it accelerates. Look at how much horsepower it has. And if it's a self-driving vehicle like a Tesla, look at the fact that you don't have to drive in your everyday traffic. Let the car do the driving. And you can enjoy your cup of coffee and look at your personal data assistant, your iPad or your phone or your onboard computer system in the car itself. They'll sell you on the benefits, but all the while taking away your liberties, taking away your ability to look beyond the veil. And that requires critical thinking skills. So when they talk about brain-to-brain connections, when they talk about communicating with a computer by being directly connected with your brain, they're going to suppress those higher thought processes. They are going to push you down to the brainstem level. When you are in a hive mind, you are no longer thinking critically. You're reacting emotionally, instinctively. This is where they are going to keep people who are connected, brain to brain and brain to computer, with these interface devices. There's nothing benevolent about it. But they will never tell you that. I'm telling you because I read their white papers and journals. I read it and I understand their technologies and I extrapolate where these technologies will be applied. What I'd like to do at this point is to conclude the program for this evening. This has been kind of heavy information, and I feel like you need a break from really my going any deeper into this. I would ask you to join me on Wednesdays and Thursdays for 1-hour live streams, and one of those days will be devoted to instruction, to teaching some of the basics based upon the things that patrons have asked me to cover for them, such as explaining the basics of quantum computing. The other day will be spent with the newest developments in the world of technology and giving you my thoughts about those developments. And then Fridays, again, I would invite you to join me here at Blog Talk Radio. I'm getting a sense that probably 1 hour is sufficient. So I'm asking for your comment by email or through my contact tab at anthonypatch.com if you would prefer that it run 2 hours. What I talk about, as I said, is pretty involved and can be pretty deep, and perhaps 2 hours is just too much to absorb at one time. So this will be our test. We'll just kind of go for 1 hour this evening, and then I'll wait for your comments. And certainly when I bring in guests, which we will be doing from time to time, we will extend the time frame so that we have an opportunity to hear what our guests have to offer. But again, I think this is enough for you to chew on this evening, and I thank you for listening. We need to continue the conversation, and I hope you will join me here at Blog Talk Radio as well as the live streams each week. And Lord willing, we will continue the conversation on into the continuation of these very last days. Remember, this should be a time of joy. Turn your face to the Lord. And God bless you all. And good night.